This might sound very unk status of me, but does anyone remember when they were younger and they would just go out and play football with their friends, or even when they go play football now, the joy you get from just being on the pitch and being able to play the game you love, just carefree? Well, imagine you're mid pickup session and everything you do starts to get heavily scrutinized by some piece of technology telling you broke the rules in one way or another. As many of you may know if you're in the loop with modern day football, we've reached a point where vital parts of the game are all under the lens of technologies that can lead to changes in the result. What once felt like the beautiful game that we could enjoy even though it had its flaws to it has essentially become a game of who can play with the new technology the best. The biggest technologies in question being VAR, semi-assisted offside, footballs with chips in them, and goal line technology. On the one hand, you could say these are all a good thing. You'd assume that with said technologies, the mistakes we've seen slide through the cracks before would all get fixed. For example, Lampard's goal at the 2010 World Cup would have been counted if goal line technology existed, and Henry's handball versus Ireland in 2009 would have been reversed through VAR. And plain and simple, semi-assisted offside is absolutely phenomenal in all of the leagues that it's being used in. Why it's not in the Premier League, who knows? That league is just opposed to doing good decisions when it comes to refereeing. But the biggest reason why technology is ruining football, aside from the fact that it's adding technology into something that's very human, is because the people behind it often don't use it right, or the rules restrict the technology to even really be useful. To kind of get this point across, I think it's important to address the elephant in the room. Julian Alvarez in the Madrid derby that just happened in the Champions League round of 16 had his penalty called off after it was taken. After being notified by a coach on the Madrid bench, VAR took a look at the penalty and deemed it to be a double kick, thus putting Atletico Madrid at a disadvantage. Alright, look, did he touch it twice? That is the biggest question coming out of all of this. Probably. I'm not gonna lie, I'm in the camp that believes he probably did touch the ball twice. But this is where the rules kind of behind the technology and just the rules that are in place kind of come into play. Cool, he touched it twice and it got caught. Great, fantastic. But why was he not allowed to retake the penalty? The next taker hadn't even gone yet. But because the technology had to come out into play, the rule book came out, and the rule that's currently being discussed to be changed saw Atletico come out with a disadvantage. But more often than not, the officials who are in charge of making these rules and making the calls are often making bonehead decisions. Decisions that we need to dive into today to expose these referees. And real quick, boys, if you're enjoying the video, enjoying the content, enjoying the channel, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. We drop weekly football videos as well, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel, boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. But with that being said, boys, let's get into the downfalls of VAR and referees and technology in football. When it comes to talking about the shortcomings of technology in football, VAR is 100% going to be in question. Video assistant refereeing over the last handful of years has been the biggest talking point because of how many times we have seen the system that is meant to fix mistakes just get things completely wrong. And why is it getting things wrong? Because the decisions are still being made by human referees when all is said and done. Look, I'm not going to call out any specific referee, but the Premier League as a whole by far has the worst referees in the world. So you give these guys who are already making terrible decisions in real time, week after week, a system to look at mistakes over and over and over to try and fix them, and go figure they mess up so many times. And I could really go on and on about how much the Premier League referees suck and how much they mess up VAR decisions specifically, but we'd probably be here until Arsenal win a league title again. And as terrible as they are, and we'll get into some examples, they aren't the only ones in the world that tend to get decisions wrong at a high level. For example, let's take our attention to the 2022 World Cup. The World Cup that one might say is the least controversial of all time. The final game in the group stages saw France match up against Tunisia. Tunisia in this match needed a win to even have a chance of progressing to the next stage, and France ideally just needed a win to top the group and to start building momentum after a slow start to that point. The game would pretty much be back and forth, and Tunisia actually had a goal ruled off for offside thanks to the brilliant semi-assisted offside technology. They'd find their opener through Khazri at the 58th minute, which put France in slight jeopardy to lose their first place spot. France needed a response, and they would push for the rest of the game. And at the death of the match, literally at the 98th minute, a loosely cleared ball by Tunisia would find Griezmann in the box, which he would tuck away to equalize. Except in steps VAR. See, VAR stepped in and pretty much decided they were not going to let this fly. Griezmann was definitely offside when the ball was initially played, but as you can see, the defender made an attempt to win and clear the ball, which should have reset the offside. But in the hands of VAR, a defender making a clear attempt to win the ball is not set in stone, but rather is subjective and can be decided on the fly. So after seeing the defender rise up and challenge for the ball, VAR deemed that he did not make a deliberate attempt to play the ball, and thus Griezmann was ruled offside. In the grand scheme of things, this didn't really ruin the tournament for France, but it robbed them of a goal that could have changed their momentum going forward in the competition. But it's not usually the case when VAR mistakes don't end up having a long impact. For our next example, we take our attention to the Champions League, where Man City, at the height of their alleged corruption, pulled out an absolute madness. In the 2020-2021 season, Dortmund would face Man City in the quarterfinal. A Dortmund team that at the time was led by Bellingham, Sancho, and Haaland was seen as a slight underdog going into this tie. In a match that was very back and forth to begin with, City would draw first blood through Kevin De Bruyne at the 18th minute. But despite Chris MD's cousin scoring first, there was still hope to pull off an upset. After all, this was a City team that didn't really have too much pedigree in Europe at the time, and Dortmund felt like they could push this team to the very end. So at the 33rd minute, this is where Dortmund really had a chance to kick things off. After failing to control it, Ederson allowed for a loose ball to get in front of him outside the box, and Mr. PR himself, Jude Bellingham, sniffed the opportunity and pounced on it like a shark, taking the ball off of Ederson while being kicked in the process and slotting it away into an empty net. This goal could have easily been the catalyst for Dortmund to push City and potentially get the win. But in steps VAR and its insane referees. In their eyes, despite the fact that Ederson was the one who made contact with Jude, this goal would be disallowed and a foul for Ederson was given instead. You gotta be kidding me, right? In what world is this a foul on the goalkeeper? Probably in a world where 115 financial charges is okay. I will also say Gundogan looked offside in City's second goal in the game, but it wasn't really scrutinized. And despite Dortmund being able to push City the entire way, City would eventually win over both legs 4-2. But you have to imagine, if this goal stood, how differently the tie would have been. This young squad with Jude, Sancho, and Haaland would have probably taken that opportunity. They would have sniffed blood and they would have pounced, especially considering the second leg was at the Signal Iduna Park. But alas, they were robbed of the opportunity. And this is just one team that was affected. No more did technology affect the footballing team like it did in the 1920 Premier League season, where one bad VAR call or lack thereof affected 3 different clubs. This was actually the inaugural year of VAR in the Premier League, which again was introduced to help mitigate errors and fix any mistakes that happened on the fly. Well, this season when Villa would play Sheffield at home, VAR did not intervene in a moment that could have definitely helped some clubs. To give you some context, this is a Villa team that was long ways away from their time with Unai Emery, where they've been finding some good success. This Villa team was on the ropes. They were very bad. They needed every single point they could get. So this match against Sheffield was considered a massive opportunity for Villa to pick up some points and create some separation from teams in the relegation zone. Ultimately, the game would end up finishing 0-0, and each team walked away with a point, which I'm sure was important. However, Sheffield should have won the match. See, at a point in the game, Sheffield had won a free kick in a very dangerous position on the pitch. A cross would be put in and Villa's keeper Nyland would come out to claim the ball, but he literally fell into his own goal in the process, ultimately seeing the ball cross the entire line. Yet referee Michael Oliver's watch for goal line technology never buzzed, which meant that on paper everyone knew that it wasn't a goal. So in turn, Villa would try and get the play started again as quickly as they could. So when a technology as reliable as goal line technology is failing you, this is where theoretically VAR should be able to step in, fix the mistake that happened, award Sheffield their goal, and everyone goes on about the rest of the game, right? I mean, that only sounds like the most logical thing that could happen. So what did VAR do? Nothing. VAR didn't even try and attempt to get the referee to go to the screen. They didn't stop play to review what happened. They did absolutely nothing. The keeper literally fell into his own goal and nothing was done, allowing Villa to escape with at least a point. This point would prove to be vital for the rest of the season, as Villa would go on to survive that year in the Premier League by, you guessed it, 1 point. Literally 1 point, with 2 teams finishing with 34. Watford had a worse goal difference, but Bournemouth would have been the ones to survive had this goal stood, but instead Villa came out lucky. And over this last handful of years, Villa has been able to bring in talents like Emi Martinez, Rashford, Watkins, managers like Unai Emery, get into the Champions League, while Bournemouth had to crawl their way back into the Premier League and are just now seeing a resurgence. But again, you have to ask yourself, why did VAR not do anything? Because there's humans on the other side of the screen. Literally the same guys who make mistakes week in and week out saw a goalkeeper fall into his own net with the ball in his hands and decided everything was calm. There's no consistency across the board when it comes to the logic of VAR. We've seen it so many times. Like I said, boys, we could really sit here and count how many times VAR has messed up across multiple competitions. The Premier League alone definitely takes the cake. You had that issue with Arsenal where the ball went out of play, but Newcastle just kept it going, and it took VAR like 3 minutes, and because they couldn't come up with the decision, they just decided to give Newcastle the goal. You had Luis Diaz's goal against Spurs being disallowed for no reason. You had Thomas Suchek getting sent off for the softest elbow known to mankind. You had Brighton getting a goal chalked off because VAR drew the offside line on the wrong defender. Again, I could go on and on and on, but at the end of the day, this technology, which at least on paper was designed to fix the couple of flaws that come with the game, but instead we now just have a bucket load more problem. It just doesn't make sense. Technology as we know it is ruining the game. It's absolutely crazy. But hey, you guys can let me know what you think. Is VAR good? Is it only semi-assisted offside that's good? Why do we have football with chips inside of them? You guys can let me know. But we're only so many years away until they just replace referees with Terminators or Tesla robots or something like that.